So this week we are covering,
without further ado,
Kid Baltan, which is the moniker of Dick Raaijmakers, who was a pioneer from the Netherlands. Early on, much like many of our favorites, he was born in 1920, 1921.
Well, let's rewind a little bit.
So he's part of that post-war boom.
Let's talk about how we discovered him. We found his work through our enjoyment of Tom Dissevelt's music,
Yes.
which we'll be talking about.
We were more familiar with Tom Dissevelt's music.
Well, we thought he was the guy.
We did think he was the guy.
We were like, oh, this guy is a tape musician making sci-fi era tape music, releasing albums. I had heard that he was commissioned by Philips, to make what
Space
was
music.
believed to be music of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought he was the guy. I was like, we had him on our bill to cover as one of our subjects.
Still very worthy of that.
Right,
for sure.
and he will be covered as part of this experience. But what we found out is that, by listening to his music, and for those of you familiar with his work, you may have seen the name Kid Baltan, right?
Yeah. It's a little play on words we'll explain later.
Associated with Tom Dissevelt's name.
Yeah, so if you look for Tom Dissevelt's music, you'll always find some work that he did with Kid Baltan.
And it kind of reminds me
wait,
of like...
who's this person? Who's this 1990s DJ that he's working with?
Exactly. It's a little bit like... But we've come to find that it's a little bit like, Batman and Robin, the dynamic duo.
Yeah.
Where they were partners in crime. And,
Not really by choice, though.
Kid Baltan was the studio hand who allowed Tom Dissevelt to kind of realize his compositional skills in the way of electronic music.
Yeah, so this kind of took us down a different path than we were expecting, because we had said, we love Tom Dissevelt's music, we know it very well, it's very, very space age, all of his music is about space. Fantasy in Orbit is one of the albums. And we thought, he's our guy. And then as we started to research, we found that the actual, pioneer of electronic music and the equipment and the techniques was his little partner in crime, Kid Baltan, who we started diving into, and then we kind of got obsessed with him and his work and realized, we actually want to talk about him. So that's how this got started for us.
Well, it is, a cosmic tape music conversation.
Yeah.
So he's the cosmic tape musician.
Mm-hmm, for sure. We found that his trajectory and his story seems to mirror a lot of others that we've studied. Pierre Schaeffer would be one. I would say Daphne Oram would be another. He really got, his musical training, but his passion was radio.
What instrument did he train on?
Piano. Yeah, so he fits into our little narrow realm of early electronic musicians from the space age. He was born in 1930. I had him mixed up. Tom Dissevelt, I believe, was born in 1921. Kid Baltan. I like calling him Kid Baltan. His name is very difficult for me. He was born in 1930, and he grew up in what was considered a pretty cosmopolitan city in the Netherlands. And he studied piano at the Royal Conservatory of The Hague, which I'm pretty sure Tom Dissevelt studied several instruments there as well. So I don't know that they actually crossed paths.
So no slouch of a music.
Yeah, they're both talented musicians.
Music, education. It's not like he's, like Tomita, where he went to school for art, and became a musician.
Yeah,
somehow.
Yeah. These are, trained, instrumentalists, I guess you would say. And I'm going to just confirm that they both studied there, because, yes, they both studied at the Royal Conservatory of The Hague. Tom Dissevelt studied the trombone and the clarinet and piano. But from what I've heard, Kid Baltan studied piano at the Royal Conservatory of The Hague and was kind of on a path, I can relate to this so much, to be a mediocre professional pianist. It was sort of like playing as an accompanist, playing in orchestras, what have you, and as a teacher.
For those of you who've ever been to music school, I've had that experience, and I like kind of scraped the surface on music school, but like you hit that point where you realize, oh,
yeah, like
I'm not going to be good enough.
A superstar.
Like, I am
I'm not going to be a pioneer.
Going to be a pioneer of this instrument. I'm not going to like take, cello to the next frontier.
Yeah. So his family actually moved to, and forgive me for saying this incorrectly, Eindhoven in the Netherlands.
It sounds good to me.
A smaller town. So they moved from what was like a move and shaken cosmopolitan center to Eindhoven. Because his father was he worked in the Social Security office. And I don't really know what that means in the Netherlands, but he was very high up in this sort of government position. And so they moved him to Eindhoven. And what happens to be in Eindhoven? The Philips NAT lab. So if you don't know, which I didn't know fully, Philips, the sort of like multinational corporation, was based in the Netherlands.
The Apple of the Netherlands.
So most familiarly, they make those lighting systems that change colors to sound.
Now that's
like a really popular thing that's out right now. But they've been around since I think like 1914.
They also, one of my favorite developments was the fact that they patented the cassette.
Yes.
In 1963.
They also patented the CD with Sony.
Right, yeah.
And the DVD.
Sony
so Philips is hugely important in the development of electronic music.
In the audio industry. Consumer audio industry.
And something I was listening to, which I'll get into later because it had me really pumped, was explaining that Philips stuff, their music that they sold through the record industry, and their electronics and things were never sold under the Philips label. They were sold under Norelco. Isn't that interesting?
That's why they call the cassette case a Norelco box.
A Norelco case. Yeah. The actual plastic case that you put your cassette in. The case that it comes in, which if you've picked up any of our cassette tape loops that we make and sell in our shop, they come in a Norelco case. I never put that together.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so interesting.
I just thought of that now, honestly, like because you mentioned the Norelco name, and I was like, oh, that's got to be why they call it.
That's crazy. The things that kind of continue on in our language that we don't know where they come from. That's so interesting. Mm-hmm. So Philips, based in this town that he had moved to with his family. So after finishing school and realizing being a mediocre piano player was not going to make him satisfied in life.
It's not going to cut it for his goal in life.
He said, I'd rather work kind of like at the lowest level possible at this Philips plant and learn about radio. Because as we know, most people during this era were introduced to radio, at the age of 3 probably. So they came out of the womb hearing this like mystical sound from the radio and became fascinated with it. And it was a big, big industry at the time. It was the cultural center of life.
I think of people who were excited about radio developments and radio technology sort of the same way I think of people that are into Ableton Live or, synthesizers now. Like they're the enthusiasts who liked the idea of getting involved with recorded music.
I mean, it was pretty egalitarian in a way as well. I don't think there was any home that didn't have a radio. And, I'm sure...
Are we talking pre-tape recorder?
Yeah, this is 1945, let's say.
Gotcha, yeah. So even still, there wasn't a medium that you could take advantage of.
When he starts working towards the NAT Lab, it's 1950.
It was 1948, I think, the first tape recorders.
The first tape recorders in the U.S.
In the U.S.
That were, available for commercial use.
Basically Ampex.
Ampex, yeah, exactly.
Happened in 1948.
Because we stole it from
Funded
the Germans.
heavily by Bing Crosby.
Yeah. That's a great story. Anyway, so I found this great article talking about how he got started at the Philips NAT lab, but he started like kind of on the assembly line. And he was just working on the assembly line of radios. And did mention televisions, I thought, as well.
So he was building them on the assembly line kind of thing. Like he had his little assignment.
He had his little piece of it that he did.
Right.
Starting in 1954, he worked on the assembly line, and it said in the radio and TV set production department of Philips. And, you know, going back to the radio stuff, he has this great little anecdote that has been translated to English for me so that I could read it, about how his very, very first memory was of seeing the radio. I guess his father had just brought it home, and he was like 2 or 3 years old, and he remembers just seeing this box and going, radio. And apparently, you know, this has been corroborated by his family, that, you know, he, from the moment he saw the radio, he thought, that's what I'm going to be about. It's so interesting, right? What is that connection that we have at such a young age to know what excites us and to pursue that our whole lives? I have a similar, you know, sense of that for myself.
Yeah, no,
But it's not something I sat and thought about what I want my life to be about. I was just drawn to certain things.
Mm-hmm. And it's not like you got into it in the last year or so. And
no, and it's not like
okay, I guess I'll settle on this one.
My brain wasn't formed enough to have made those connections. It's just purely instinctual.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it almost feels like there's some deep programming that we're born with.
Or sort of...
but I don't really agree with that, so...
sort of like an evolutionary thing, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Where that comes from. Or maybe he was played... I know that, like, I was played music in the womb. You know.
You remember that?
The headphones... No, I don't remember being in the womb.
I was going to say, like... Wow.
The headphones on the belly thing. I was exposed to music. Like, it was very, very important that, you know, even in the womb, I was being played music that they thought was... You know, Mozart, Beethoven, all the way through jazz and rock.
You were getting some vibrations.
I was getting all those vibrations. So when I came out, it's like, of course I want to be a musician. 1954, he's on the assembly line. And he, like we always talk about, we actually have some evidence here of how he got to where he was going with electronic music. It wasn't just, he walked into the lab one day and said, let me make that electronic music.
Yeah,
I know all these other stories we read, we're like, but how?
I got a razor blade.
But when? But who? What are the dots here connecting this? But his story is really laid out for us here, which I appreciate. And it may seem mundane, but to me it excites me because it helps me understand that, you know, this led to this, led to this. So he is working on the assembly line, so he's getting more experience with, you know, understanding how radios are put together. And he's getting experience in the field of applied electronics.
I think it's interesting that this electronic music studio that we're about to talk more about...
We're about to enter.
...was originated...
We're leading you to it.
...at an actual place where music technology was being literally created. Invented, created. There was engineers... on staff that were designing it. And then they had a factory where they made it. So, you know, unlike some of the other studios that we have discovered through this process, they kind of had the equipment was first in a way.
It was, actually.
You know, whereas...
You're jumping ahead of my story a little bit, but we'll go down this road. Some of these
other... Well, it was just a thought that I had. You know,
it's a good one.
Some of these other studios... It seemed to be the ongoing struggle, you know, like they were constantly in the search. They all had gear lust.
Yes.
You know, they were constantly in the search for more and better equipment. You can almost like think, for example, the Radiophonic Workshop. You know, you can the story is almost timeline tied to pieces of gear that they got over the years.
Yes.
You know, it's like, and then they got...
And this is why we have these songs.
The Yamaha CS80V. and the sound became this, and there was this version of the Doctor Who theme that came out of it, and this guy did it, and it's almost like the gear almost like goes in line with the timeline of their development. Whereas I feel like with this studio, the gear was always going to be paramount,
ahead of the game.
Yeah,
it was actually why they were making music there. Because they were developing these technologies and they wanted to show the world that it wasn't just for uses of war or medical devices, because this is also that Cold War era where all of the innovations were really geared towards warfare. They wanted to show that their company was also doing things for the edification of society, and that this could be used for music, and they wanted to prove that thesis.
It made it sound, the way that you described that when you learned that information and told me about it, was it almost seemed like a cover.
Yes, it does feel like somebody, but it's a very like pencil pusher kind of thing. Like they're in a boardroom talking about how
like the
to
Americans
spin.
Are here, show them the music studio.
Yeah, how to spin it. And they did do tours for the public where they would take them through the music studio and show them kind of what Philips was up to, and they would give them a record made by Kid Baltan and Tom Dissevelt, showing that, oh look, this is what we want you to remember from this, that we're making music for the space race. We're making futuristic sounds and, bringing these delightful sounds to your home. Don't think about that other stuff we're doing behind those doors.
Right, yeah.
And I don't really know the extent of it, but they're very good at PR and making you think they're
and
like
if
doing
you think
fun
about
stuff.
it shows off what their technology is capable of in the hands of genius level, electronic musicians and composers. It's sort of like, couldn't you imagine
They took the best of
someday you could maybe have a lab like this, like in your basement or
But to your point though, that this music that we love so much and that we have access to is because it was a multinational corporation taking a small division of their huge operation to kind of suss out this thesis that the equipment they were making could be used to make music. Versus like Pierre Schaeffer's studio that he had to fight for every day to exist.
He's another example.
He had to get budgets approved to get the equipment. He had to go meet with these vendors.
It always seemed like an uphill battle, and maybe even led to the demise of certain people, getting fed up and leaving because of the equipment.
And having people who constantly had to maintain the equipment, that's a whole other set of staff you have to have. I know at the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, Daphne was told she could use the redundant equipment in the storerooms
at first
to start, and then
she had to prove.
She got fed up with that too.
She constantly had to prove their worth.
Yeah,
as
and imagine
a
if
division.
she was being funded by Philips to make her a Remix machine.
Right. Yeah, I feel like if she would have worked at Philips, they would have been like, "That's a brilliant idea. We'll actually get a team of engineers on that."
She did have a pretty cool grant from a corporation.
Right.
Not to say that we are pro multinational corporations doing whatever they want, because they're making music, but it's just an interesting point that we all often bring up that these pioneers had to work as part of some kind of institution that had the funding or the access to the equipment. And it didn't just come out of thin air. It didn't just come from someone's idea. But we did have, there are people who are doing it in their home. We do have the Raymond Scotts and the B.B. and Louis Barons of the world.
Yeah.
And many others. But these specific ones that got to show off the top-of-the-line equipment, it's pretty cool. And obviously it was archived and released, which is a benefit as well. There's so much of it that went unheard and that we're just sort of like digging through the crates now because they didn't have the support of an institution.
Well, just in that one, video that's so popular where they do like a little studio tour, like you see like there are these like highly...
I might as well grab that.
Developed like pulleys and, like little... like just to make the tape loop go around and not lose tension. Like there was like this thing that looks like it was, engineered with metal and all the right materials by engineers instead of just being like some duct tape. It
looked really fun and easy.
Right.
So there's this great video, and let me just catch us up on the story a little bit.
Of course they make it look fun
and then I'll throw us back in. So he was on the assembly line. He's learning about applied electronics. he decides to take a course and get a diploma as a radio mechanic from the Dutch Radio Society, because that was the thing you did. And then his technical engineer, overseer guy, he was also an authority and pioneer in the field of stereophony and artificial reverberation. Showed him that you could mix applied electronics and music to make electronic music. I guess Mr. Kid Baltan was not thinking in this way. He was thinking, okay, I wanted to be a musician and that didn't work out, so I'm going to go into my passion of electronics and learn about radio and get my diploma and, work at Philips and kind of work my way up. And this sort of mentor of his was like, no. Electronic music is the thing. This is where you're going to shine.
Right.
So he got him into the acoustics lab. I've also heard it called the physics lab. It was sort of more scientific approach to sound that they were working on at Philips. This same guy asked him, his name is Vermeulen. He asked him to work in the electronic music lab that they were building. So they had been developing, I guess, this guy who is, a pioneer of artificial reverberation, and he's excited about electronic music, and he sees something in Kid Baltan. He sees something in him, and he says, "You're my guy."
He was trained as a musician.
Mm-hmm.
He's got this formal training, and
he's got a lot of curiosity.
Took it upon himself to learn the technology side, which was probably pretty rare to, come across somebody with that combination of a background.
But someone who's a creative artist as well as, and trained in music, as well as someone who's got a good grasp of applied electronics and radio technology.
It probably helped that he had a mentor that was able to, kind of see that in him and help him along the way.
Yeah, this is why I like knowing the steps that got him where he was, because now you can see, yes, he pursued his passion. He got his education. He went to work in the right place. But there was someone who saw that in him and said, oh, I actually am a gatekeeper of this movement that's happening over here, and I think you need to come with me. Right. And so we get to see how that all plays out and not just wonder, like, oh, one day they showed up and they said, I'm the man for the job. It doesn't work like that. So what happened is this mentor of his is, the reason that the Song of the Second Moon happened. So if you're unfamiliar...
Did he have anything to do with the fact that Tom Dissevelt got involved?
I think Tom Dissevelt was recruited by Philips as a composer and someone who was interested in electronic music, but I don't think he actually knew anything about electronic music at the time. He was playing in big bands and traveling the world as a bass player.
Did Kid Baltan and Tom Dissevelt know each other in school?
No. As far as I know, they were assigned to each other at the Philips lab. So this is from 1957. So it's considered one of the first, if not the first. There's a lot of argument about firsts in electronic music, but the first electronic pop song. So Philips was all about, how can we use this electronic equipment that some people already had been playing with to make sound organizations, sound collages, and how can we make pop music with it? Like, how can we make music that people will feel, connected to and accessible?
I can see how this piqued your interest at this point.
Yeah. So in 1957, Kid Baltan was assigned to be the assistant engineer to Tom Dissevelt in the electronic music lab, which was part of NAT lab. It's a very long Dutch name, but they shortened it to NAT lab. And they were doing other things there, but the electronic music department was one of the big ones. And it explains here in this awesome article that I found what equipment they used. And one of them is they used a modified Onde Martenot, which I believe Olivier Messiaen, who taught Stockhausen, and Yannis Xenakis, was, known to have played. He kind of made it famous as far as I know. So the Onde Martenot or Onde Musicales is an early electronic music instrument played with a keyboard or by moving a ring along a wire, creating wavering sounds similar to a theremin. guys.
I believe Analog Systems, which I am now, keen to the difference between analog systems and analog solutions. But I think the Analog Systems company made a CV controller for modular synths that features that ring, that same ring of the Onde Martenot. It's similar to like a ribbon controller.
We call it the French connection.
Feel, but you're actually physically sliding a ring that has two strings attached to it. And, once again, Johnny Greenwood definitely had one and, kind of repopularized it in a lot of his electronic work.
So they used a modified one of these. So they technically did have a synthesizer, a keyboard synthesizer in the mix. And they used a few audio and measuring generators, which we sometimes refer to as tone generators.
Okay, like test oscillators, function generators, the Heinbach setup.
I believe, yeah. And the radio program I was listening to that was explaining this, which was actually a archived program from 1957, which was from WNYC, the NPR station in New York. They had an archive from 1957 of someone's radio show that they had at the time about electronic music, and they were introducing the world to the Song of the Second Moon. They cut and paste the tape to make the sounds for the song. So they were definitely, even though Philips was this cutting-edge place where they were trying to use electronic music to make pop music, or electronic equipment that they were building to make pop music, it was still with tape. Tape was the method. It was part of it was the way. There was no way without the tape.
Tape was the only, it was such a big development in electronic music composition because it was the first truly malleable medium, where you could actually manipulate it.
Cutting, actually making discs.
Direct to disc. Yeah. And, there's record of people doing some interesting things with that method, but, nothing was as...
The quality was frustrating, too.
Right. And nothing was as quick and easy, as tape editing, which is funny because, as we learn and go, further down, the line in terms of electronic musicians, people from the 60s, 70s, they're saying, I tried tape splicing and it made me almost want to quit trying to do this, So, if you would have come into it at the right time, you would have seen it as a luxury. An absolute joy.
Yeah, this is 1957 they're doing this.
And the fact that it was possible, the fact that tape, splicing made, even working with sound, and manipulating it a possibility, it was people were very excited by that to the point to where it was just, all I have to do is, do some scissors and, add a little piece of tape and I can add sound, that doesn't exist to a recording. What? So,
and also the quality of the sound that you were hearing back.
Oh, as we know, the more times a tape plays back, it degrades over time. But initially, it's, if you record, with a decent amount of signal level, the signal to noise ratio is relatively low. And, it is a very high quality interpretation of the original signal. As compared to some of the other... And
also has a quality or a characteristic.
Right.
That hadn't really
been heard before. The magic of tape.
So, they were using magnetophones. Which
is just another... I think that was sort of like a European term for a tape recorder.
It's also a brand.
Okay. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's the brand or model name. Developed by engineers of the German electronic company AEG in the 30s. So that's what they had at the studio.
They had 10 tape machines. It makes me so jealous.
So Kid Baltan is the one actually doing the cutting and pasting and all of the work with the electronics, as he was the engineer. And then Tom Dissevelt is sitting with a pipe being yes, that's the right thing to do. So that was kind of the groundbreaking moment. And then I found this amazing radio program, like I was saying, from WNYC. This is from the NPR archives. And this was broadcast on November 30th in 1957.
Oh, wow.
And this guy, Edward Canby, had this radio program, and it sounds like he was introducing the world to all the new electronic music that was happening in 1957. So cool. So
People were really excited.
He starts out talking about Edgar Varese because I guess the week before he had been going on about him. And so he hadn't said enough about him yet, so he needed to finish. And so the first half of this program is about Edgar Varese, and he is introducing Poème électronique. And you may be asking, why am I bringing up Edgar Varese? We haven't even...
why are you bringing
We haven't even covered him yet. But he's come up a few
Varese.
times. He's come up when we talked about BB and Louis Barron because they worked on a piece with him in their studio. And he's come up when we talked about Pierre Schaeffer because he also worked there on some things. And now when we're talking about Kid Baltan and Tom Dissevelt, he's coming up again. And the connection here is Philips. So, he also came up when we talked about Yannis Xenakis because of Philips. I forgot about that. So, Poème électronique was a piece that Edgar Varese made in 1956, 1955, and it was commissioned. It was commissioned or funded by Philips because, if you remember, Expo 58, which it's interesting because this radio program says it was broadcast in 1957. So Expo 58 must have actually it says it started in 58. I was thinking maybe it started in 57. But
well, they were probably planning for it for a whole year or so. They built a pavilion.
The radio DJ, or whatever he would be called, was saying, oh, this song, premiered at Expo 58, but this is 57. So I'm a little unclear on those dates. But as we know, the Philips Pavilion was designed by Yannis Xenakis for Poème électronique to be played. And if you joined our watch party during the Yannis Xenakis week, you would have seen footage that I found of the sort of a recreation of what happened inside that pavilion, that they had a light show with projections and visuals, and
Philips
that's some Philips technology. It all makes sense to me now.
All the dots are starting to be connected.
They are. It's very cosmic. And Yannis Xenakis had his concrete piece playing as you entered and exited the Philips Pavilion, and then Edgar Varese's Poème électronique was playing when you were inside. It was a very intense, visceral experience. And that's Expo 58 in Brussels.
If I had a time machine...
yeah, that's where I would go.
That would be top my list, I think. I would really want to be at Expo 58.
Share this. Oh, the Atomium. It's so cool. So... this radio show, he's talking about Edgar Varese, and he's trying to convince everyone that electronic music is cool and that we should think about sound differently and not try to label this as music.
It wouldn't take any convincing in 2020.
And not be upset that we're calling this electronic music because it was more of a sound experience, and he does a really good job pinpointing some of the sounds in Poème électronique, and he plays them, and then he talks about how they have kind of a human feel because they're not just stagnant like a sine wave. Edgar Varese did more of a musique concrète approach, and he would take sounds and manipulate them like sounds from nature and things like that he had recorded to tape, and then manipulate them and process them. So they kind of are more of a sound collage of a human touch.
Gotcha.
So then he goes on to say, and just by chance, someone over in Holland from the Philips Corporation sent me this brand new record of Song of a Second Moon. And he goes on to talk about how this is a much more conventional approach to electronic music and contrasting it to Poème électronique, and how, this is kind of a way in for people to hear electronic music as pop, and how interesting that he's clearly getting fed electronic music from the Philips Corporation to play on his radio show.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting.
So you know, he kind of touted this Song of a Second Moon as a way for mainstream acceptance to happen for electronic music.
He may have been thumbing his nose a bit.
He was a little bit. He was like, I
the-
kind of like the Varese stuff better because it's a new art form, whereas this is just sort of, you know, taking something we already know and using the equipment. But he did say it was still in the realm of not just trying to make something sound like a trumpet.
Right.
You know,
It was most of the way there.
yeah. It was still creating a new sound. And I think, you know, the thing
compared
about...
to today's standards, you know, yeah.
Yes. The thing about the music that Kid Baltan and Tom Dissevelt were making is that it's really fun. It's of the space age era. All the songs are, you know, about space exploration, or they have space titles. They're very cosmic. The sounds are very spacey.
But it's about the lighthearted space.
But it's like the Jetsons.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think we need to have room for all of those viewpoints. The serious and academic explorations and approaches, as well as the more lighthearted mainstream pop approaches. I like to blend those two. Like, I like if a song has kind of a little bit of everything in it.
Yeah, and...
I will say the Song of the Second Moon, it was called that because they finished it the day after the Russians launched Sputnik, which, you know, was the first artificial satellite.
Naming.
Kid Baltan, as I'm going to continue calling him, he did go on to do lectures about electronic music and teach about electronic music. But then he kind of went off. He made a lot of music, but he did spend the rest of his life doing more experimental theater productions and making music for theater, but that he was creating. So he was a very multidisciplinary artist and teacher. And it's interesting because he was trying to not be a teacher, and then he ended up being a very, very important teacher.
I found it interesting that somewhere along the line we learned that he turned down doing the score for
2001: A
Space Odyssey.
Yeah, apparently Stanley Kubrick reached out to him and pestered him. Maybe he heard this radio program that I heard from 1957. And he pestered him, and he was not interested. He was just like, no, I'm not interested in that. Can you imagine?
So that just proves that he was kind of on his own path.
Yeah, he was more interested in how music and technology integrated with electronic music and exploring how to express that, I guess, through performance art. He does talk about, you know, how he was, again, born in the right place at the right time. He was born literally in a place where there was this institution that he could, you know, have access to the equipment, but also being in the post-war boom, you know, coming up during that time.
Yeah, right place, right time.
That this is when it was happening, and so if you weren't part of that, it wasn't going to be your fate. He does talk about, too, how the clash of music and technology really, like, upset people. And it was like a shockwave through society. I think he didn't have a like or dislike for it. It was more just that it was a fact. He, you know, says he was part of things from the very beginning. And he got to see how it all happened. That's such an interesting thing in later in your life to be able to go like, oh, I was there. I was in that moment watching it all unfold.
I got to see things unfold.
Yeah, so, like, he calls it the peace of the traditional music world was rudely shattered by an electronic meteorite. That's pretty cosmic.
Yeah, it is.
And it shook everybody up, but it also gave them, like, a hope for a new future. So I think this sort of futurist movement and the technology and the art, if you were in the center of that storm, you got to ride the wave of what was happening and be part of something really, really exciting. That, you know, we're just trying to tap into that energy, that electrical force fields of what was happening during that time and try to, you know, explore it more, understand it more than what, you know, maybe we can just find on the surface in mainstream information that we get.
Well, that's kind of like where...
And find that bolt of lightning.
I feel like we are cosmic explorers in a sense because we are constantly traveling back in time.
It's like the magic school bus. We've said that before.
Yeah.
The cosmic magic school bus.
To find all of the pieces of the puzzle that interrelate. And as we are finding here, especially with the Edgar Varese tie-in.
Yeah, he's sort of like a time traveler.
Yeah.
He hopped all over the globe and is the connector.
He was definitely a key player. And, you know, he kind of connected...
I don't think I shared.
I was going to say he's the Kevin Bacon of early electronic music.
I think he is. Edgar Varese is the Kevin Bacon of electronic music. I will say one more thing. He did, with some other people, he founded this institution it's a studio for electro-instrumental music. A center for research and development of new musical instruments in the electronic performing arts.
Raaijmaker did?
And it is in Amsterdam.
Or, I'm sorry, Baltan did?
We can call him Raaijmaker. We just don't know if we're saying his last name correctly. So he was part of the founding of this. It's not just him. But yes, STIME is a Center for Research and Development of New Musical Instruments in the Electronic Performing Arts. That sounds pretty cool, and I would like to go there. So that's our coverage of Kid Baltan. Who's excited?
Dick Raaijmaker.
I'm pretty excited. You're just going to keep yelling his name out.
Well, I want people to know that
his name is Dick Raaijmaker, but we don't know if we're saying it right.
Or Raaijmaker.
Thank you so much for joining us for another Cosmic Conversation.
Yeah.
Have a great weekend. It's a long weekend for some of us.